Transit, it will not join in any fight that threatens the Central Artery project, even a fight over Scheme Z. Conservation law officials and Secretary of Transportation Fred Salvucci spent today locked in negotiations over just such an agreement.
Some groups have been really pushing hard for further consideration of alternatives that involve tunnels, so that we'd have less highway above our heads, and others have said, no, we prefer to talk mitigation. So that has been a real dividing line between groups.
What continues to irritate critics about the Scheme Z plan the most, though, is how it came to be. Transportation executives maintain it's the most economical and realistic proposal, but there are persistent rumblings that Scheme Z was not the preferred alternative of the staff of engineers and planners that first studied all 31 alternatives. The 10 o'clock news has been told that Plan M, a blueprint that included a more expensive tunnel option, was the first choice, but that Secretary Salvucci overruled that recommendation. Tomorrow night on the 10 o'clock news, Central Artery officials go to bat to defend Scheme Z. For the 10 o'clock news, I'm John Hashimoto.
At the State House today, the 1990 legislature had its last chance to vote on a constitutional amendment guaranteeing women the right to abortion. The vote was never taken. Today's joint meeting of the House and Senate lasted just 3 minutes, then adjourned for the year. Supporters of the amendment blamed Senate President William Bulger. Nikki Nichols-Gamble of Planned Parenthood said that Bulger, quote, refused to allow substantive debate and thwarted all pro-choice efforts to bring the issue to a vote. The amendment's opponents called today's inaction, quote, a major victory for the pro-life movement. The judicial nomination of the Senate President's top aide came to a final showdown today after last week's bitter clash between supporters and detractors of Paul Mahoney. When it was time to vote, the men and women of the Governor's Council gave Mahoney their support unanimously. David Boeri reports on the end of one war and what might be the start of another.
None of last week's main draw was here, nor was nominee Paul Mahoney, who watched most of last week's battle from the sidelines.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
With Councilor Jojo Langone's motion on Mahoney seconded, the discussion turned to two of the allegations and questions raised by Alan Dershowitz last week. First, the question of ethnic bias involving comments to a newspaper reporter. And second, that
Mr. Mahoney's former employer, Suffolk County District Attorney Gareth Byrne, opposed Mr. Mahoney's nomination several years ago as a result of Mr. Mahoney's failure to appropriately handle evidence in a matter in the West Roxbury District Court.
After a week-long inquiry by special investigators, Councilor James O'Brien reported,
there was absolutely no evidence presented in this myriad of interviews and research that would substantiate the allegations made by Mr. Dershowitz.
Investigators say they spoke with 13 people who sat beside Garrett Byrne on the Judicial Nominating Council, and none of them could recollect Byrne opposing Mahoney. Does this mean he didn't? Not necessarily, because two other people on the council chose not to speak with the investigators. Recent newspaper stories quoted sources close to the nominating process who said Garrett Byrne strongly opposed Mahoney when he was considered for a judgeship in 1982. And one source close to Byrne in the DA's office told us that Byrne did everything in his power to stop Mahoney from becoming a judge. Of course, whether Byrne's alleged objections had any merit and whether they'd carry any weight today is unclear.
Rumors of alleged guilt by association, quotes from unnamed sources, implied allegations of wrongdoing based on hearsay comments attributed to a dead man.
Councilor Edward O'Brien not only wanted Mahoney, he wanted a pound of flesh from Dershowitz, too.
I would recommend that the Board of our overseers investigate Mr. Dershowitz's activities in these matters, that Mr. Dershowitz richly deserves disciplinary action.
The candidate has gone through an extensive review, and I think that we should be, at least I am proud to be able to say that I'm going to vote in favor of Paul Mahoney.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Councilor James O'Brien.
Yes.
Councilor Edward O'Brien.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
Afterwards, the governor's chief of staff strongly defended the controversial nomination, saying that Mahoney had been smeared.
We have celebrity taking the place of an honest, objective appraisal of the man's qualifications. That's very unfair to Mr. Mahoney. There was no political deal whatsoever. Absolutely not. Mr. Mahoney was nominated because he's qualified to be a judge. He was confirmed by the council because he's qualified to be a judge.
Contacted this afternoon, Alan Dershowitz said, "We still haven't gotten to the bottom of the Garrett Byrne story. It's not that the investigation has cleared Mahoney, it's just that the investigation has been stymied." Dershowitz said he would welcome a Board of Bar Overseers investigation and said it would become a forum for discussion of the controversial case of 75 State Street and its allegations about Senate President William Bulger. Paul Mahoney, who was unavailable for comment today, may have become a judge, but the war involving his boss in Dershowitz is not over. For the 10 o'clock news, I'm David Bowery.
In spite of a day-long rescue effort, only 10 of the 53 pilot whales survived yesterday's stranding on Cape Cod. Rescuers managed to get 8 of the animals back out to sea, and 2 are being looked after at the New England Aquarium. The others either died or were put to death. Scientists are examining the bodies of the dead whales in hopes of finding some clue to the mysterious beaching. But such examinations have been done before, and there are still as many theories as there are beachings. Mother Nature is putting on a show in the eastern part of the sky tonight, the Geminid meteor shower. The catch is that our Boston skies are cloudy tonight, so the meteor shower will be hard to see. Our overnight lows will be in the mid-30s. Tomorrow looks to be partly cloudy with a chance of a little rain, highs near 55 degrees. Tomorrow night will be windy and cold, lows drop to the mid-20s. And Friday should be sunny but wintry, highs only in the mid-30s. It happened again at Back Bay Station. An Amtrak train rear-ended an early morning commuter train parked in the station today. This time there were scores more injured than the 59 in a similar accident 3 years ago. Luckily, again, there were no deaths. The impact reportedly may have damaged the structure of the station, hitting a cement wall and nearly sending a rail car up into Dartmouth Street. The street between Columbus Avenue and Stewart Street will be closed for at least 8 weeks. Train service to the Back Bay Station should be restored by Monday at the earliest. A fire lieutenant who was one of the first on the scene said the 2 impacted trains looked twisted like a coat hanger.
I mean, tracks are pulled up, the bedding's pulled up, the support columns missing, the structural damage to the train station and to the street here on out. People in the station were in a daze, and a lot of people were injured, but yet they were walking wounded. We looked to the rear of the car, the tunnel, and observed that the car was smashed. We went down there for a derailment, not expecting that. Upon further investigation, went through the car, and we extricated one person from under the seat and took one out. Went through the car, looked and saw a massive destruction of it. Cement, steel, and locomotive just incredibly smashed. Then realized there was a train behind there. Now we had to realize it was people in those cars, and to size up the situation, extricate who we had to, but get the walking people out because of the dense smoke and the diesel fumes that were expelling from the locomotive.
It is almost 37 months to the day that an almost identical crash in the same station was caused by a faulty signal system. The signal was repaired and no problems were reported since then. A 7-member team from the National Transportation Safety Board is in town to study today's accident. Our guest, Jim King, is a vice president at Northeastern University who once served as a member of the NTSB. Well, what do you think? Is this deja vu, so to speak, all over again?
Well, the last time around, if my memory serves me correctly, it was a rear-end collision that was directly associated with a faulty signal. In this particular case, from what we're told preliminary, that the trains were on different tracks. So to have had a rear-end collision, if that is in fact true, you'll be looking at a couple of things. Well, and those will be mechanical failure, plus any rule violations, and that would be on speed.
Mechanical or rule violations. Well, give us a little insight into the process. What happens after an accident?
Well, it's almost like being in the firehouse. In Washington, the alarm comes in that there's been a major accident. There's a go team already structured. It leaves usually within just a few hours from Washington. The field office, if need be, will send support, so they might have had support come out of New York in this case. They'll come here to Boston, and their first thing is to see that and ask that the site be preserved and documented. As we're speaking, they will have formed committees, and those committees will be the factual committees that will go through the track and structure, the question of the mechanical, the recording devices, the human factors, so that we can find out what injuries were inflicted, how there can be safety. So even though there's an accident, can we reduce the kinds of injuries we saw?
Now, I also read on the wires that a lot of different agencies besides NTSB, I mean, Amtrak will have people, the Federal Railroad Administration has people. Do all of these groups get together or get along with one another?
Well, it's interesting. They work together. They have in this case, they have a mutual interest. And even though they may sometimes be a bit competitive, they're generally safety professionals, and they know their particular product line. And so you'll get people who are experts in metallurgy, although you can't solve a metallurgical issue on site, but they will look for rail or wheel failure or what happened.
Do we really learn anything from accident to accident?
Oh, yes. Each one is unique, but many times it's rare that a single link in a chain breaks in safety in this kind of an accident. Generally, a couple of links have failed, and what you do is you take the corrective action. I think the fire department had an interesting observation that in spite of the difficulty here and the kind of the enormous forces involved, that the injuries, although serious, many of them, so many people really walked away, that they survived. And that's because of the new construction of the cars and